Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Environment and Safety and Scrutiny panel. Thank you all very much for coming and attending here today. We are quorum, and I would just like to tell everybody that's attending that we will be filming this meeting, and it's also within the public domain. The council, it's a live broadcast, so we just have to be mindful of that, and that everything that we have, we say will be out there in the public, so that I have to state that. I haven't had any apologies for absence, and I don't know if you have.
Yes, Chair. So we've had apologies for absence from Ian Sygrave. I've also had apologies from Councillor Emery, who's asked Councillor Da Costa to attend as a substitute. Also, the Cabinet members, Councillor Jogi and Councillor Chandwani, have also sent their apologies.
Thank you very much. That will be noted. We move to item number 3, items of urgent business.
We don't have any items of urgent business, Chair, but I'd just flag to the panel that we are going to amend the order of the published agenda slightly, so that item 9 and item 10 will be taken the other way around. So we'll take the community safety update first, and then followed by the waste and recycling update.
Thank you very much for that. I'll move on swiftly to item number 4, which is declaration of interest. Has anybody got any declarations of interest to declare before this meeting so that we can proceed? Okay, thank you very much. We're moving on to item number 5, which is deputations, petitions, representations or questions. Do we have any, Philip?
No, Chair, there's no deputations, questions, presentations or questions this evening.
I will move swiftly on then to item number 6, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, which is pages 1 to 8. I don't know if anybody else has got them, but I have them here. I will sign them even though I wasn't here, and also in my position as chair because of the office, and I have observed that there's nobody here that was in the last meeting, so I will just sign them off. Okay.
Really quick, so just to flag on the minutes, Chair, there are 2 actions, both of which have been completed. Previously, the Cabinet member sent round an email to the panel members around the process for setting up a community trigger, and following that, there was also an action around publishing the presentation that was given around works to trees around Parkland Walk. That's got up on the website.
Yeah, I did see that. I did observe that, actually.
Yeah. And so just to flag, so in terms of the minutes, if you could just ask the members of the panel to agree them as a correct record of the meeting.
Yes. Can you agree the minutes? Have you seen the minutes? Anybody, any objections? Okay, thank you very much. And as everybody noted, I'll move on to item number 7, which is membership and terms of reference, and that's page 9 to 46. Has everybody observed the terms of reference for the meeting? And they fully understand what they are, your commitments and responsibilities for attendance, etc. Okay.
Really quickly, so in terms of the terms of reference of the membership, what you have is a cover report, and attached to Appendix A is the terms of reference for the Parent Overview and Scrutiny Committee, as well as the 4 panels that sit below it. Appendix B sets out the scrutiny protocol, so that's basically how the scrutiny process will operate and what we can expect from each other and from the officers that attend. There is also a non-voting member protocol for you to note. And finally, possibly the most important, is Appendix D sets out the policy areas and remits for each of the panels in the main committee in terms of what policy areas are assigned to us as a panel and which cabinet member is responsible for those. So in this report, you're being asked to note all of these things. Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, Tammy.
I had a quick question, which was about the non-voting co-optees. I think it's in Appendix A 3.1. and 3.2. So it says that they'll be paid an allowance in accordance with the members' allowances scheme. Could you just clarify that, if possible?
Yes. So, within the council's constitution, there is a section that sets out the payment of co-optees. I don't have the figure off the top of my head, but if you bear with me a few minutes, I'm sure I can find it out and let you know. It's not a particularly large sum of money, but they are paid for every meeting they attend, the idea being it's sort of an incentive for their time and expenses, that kind of thing.
And so when we get to the point of voting on the co-optee today, we're also voting for their allowance to be agreed.
Has anybody got any other questions on this matter so that Philip can seek it out? Can we note the recommendations and then we'll move on and he will come back to you with that?
Okay, so the following item is number 8. So this is the appointment of a non-voting co-optee. So bear with me a moment. Yeah, so what you have in front of you on page 47 is a short report that seeks your formal approval for the reappointment of a non-voting co-opted member to the panel. The co-optee in question is a representative from the Haringey Association of Neighbourhood Watchers, and he has been on this panel for a number of years and is very experienced and has a specific interest around community safety, which is obviously directly relevant to the remit of this panel. Yeah, but as I say, he has been on this panel for a number of years, and we are seeking your formal approval to continue that arrangement for another year.
Can I ask you all to agree for the name again? Ian Sygrove, who's been on the panel for a number of years, and I would like your approval to reappoint him. That doesn't withstand that we can get other people on, because I've seen the terms of reference, you can have up to 3. So I'm just asking that the panel here today in the meeting agree for him to be reinstated. Thank you. Hi, we're going to move on to item number 10, which is now item number 9, and I will be asking Gavin Douglas to have the community safety update, please. Is that okay, Gavin?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I'm going to hand over to our resident expert in Sandeep, who knows every statistic that relates to community safety that you can imagine, and then we'd obviously welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Philip, can I check if these slides will be put on screen or? Sorry.
Presentation. So just, we're going to be referring to page 75 of the pack, which is the presentation.
Thank you. I'm happy to start, and we can perhaps catch up on the screen when we have it, but hopefully everybody's got sight of the presentation in their slide pack. Oh, here we are. No, not screen. So it means, I mean, I don't mind. It's just that my name is over here. That's why I came over here. Thank you. So if I could direct everyone's attention, please, to page number 75 in your pack, which is also on screen there. So I'm going to be presenting an overview of crime performance in the borough, mainly focusing on the last 12 months, with also some reference to longer term information and data, which will hopefully be a useful context for some of the wider work that this panel will be involved in over time. So if we look at page number 76, which is the second slide within this pack here, we can see the key priority areas for the borough, and essentially each year the Community Safety Partnership alongside MOPAC, which is the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, that's for London, agree the key priorities for the borough. Now clearly all crime is a priority, but with limited resources we need to focus our attention on particular areas that we feel are the highest risk of harm, threat to the borough. And so in that case, we look at lots of data and information analysis, and that's brought us to the conclusion of focusing mainly on non-domestic violence with injury, which essentially is street-based violence, and also robbery. And there's lots of reasons why those tend to be some of the key priorities and have been a key priority for the borough for a while now. But alongside that, clearly there's also a focus on violence, vulnerability and exploitation in a wider sense. And that includes things like, as you can see on screen, sexual violence, domestic abuse, women's safety, particularly women's safety at night is a particular concentration at the moment, child sexual exploitation, weapon-based crimes, so things like knife crime and also firearms-related activity, and also hate crime and antisocial behaviour. Now, that's not to say that other crime types outside of these aren't also important, but clearly with limited resources, these do form some of our largest areas of focus. The next slide, that's page number 77, shows the crime breakdown for the borough. So as you'll note, Haringey in the last year, hopefully you can see from your slide deck, as it should be slightly larger than what's on screen, and we've had just under 29,000 crimes reported in the borough in the last 12 months. So just under 29,000, and you can see how those are broken down into the sub-crime categories. So for example, you can see that we have just over 8,000 violent crimes, so violence against the person. We've seen around about 5,000 vehicle offences and around about 6,000 odd theft offences. So you can see how those break down. And as you follow it along to the right side of your screen, you can see how those break down even further into the smaller sub-crime categories. The next slide, which is page number 78 in your pack, is the performance overview, which essentially shows the changes and how Haringey has been doing over the last 12 months, but also look at the last 3 years. So essentially what's been changing for some of these key priority crimes. So I won't go through every single stat here on screen, but as you can see, we have noted with that just under 29,000 crimes, that is a small 5% increase in overall recorded crime year on year. So in the last 12 months compared to the previous 12 months, a 5% increase, which doesn't sound positive, and clearly it's not. However, when you contrast that with the fact that London as a whole is seeing a 9% increase in crime, the increase in Haringey is only about half the volume of the London increase. And this was essentially a predicted increase to an extent, as a year ago during some of the lockdown periods, crime levels were at some of the lowest recorded. So that's not necessarily a huge surprise, but relatively positive that Haringey's increase is only about half of the London-wide trend. Some other categories you can see on screen there, green being the reductions and some of the red being some of the increases. One of the reductions to really bring to your attention is the robbery reduction. As you'll see, Haringey has seen a 4% reduction in the last year, but also a 27% reduction over the last 3 years in robbery. Haringey has always been, I think it's fair to say, quite challenged with robbery. It's been one of the biggest areas of concern. And for those who have been working within Haringey for a while now, You might remember that just a few years back, we had close to 3,000 robberies a year. So now we're only seeing 1,100. It's clearly still 1,100 too many, but significantly better than where we were. And Haringey currently is one of the only areas across London still seeing reductions in robbery. So quite positive, but clearly still a way to go. You'll notice some other categories there. One of the red ones there being violence with injury, so street-based violence. We're seeing a 22% increase within that category in the last year. Again, not particularly positive, and that is just about 2% above the London-wide increase. But other categories, particularly gun crime at the bottom, which is quite high profile, quite serious crime, we are still seeing reductions within, for example, total gun crime, but also discharges of firearms. So generally speaking, relatively positive, still some significant way to go and some significant areas that we need to focus on even further, but some positives, I think, to take away, particularly when you look at the 3-year trends. The next slide, which is page 79, looks at public confidence in policing. So essentially, on a quarterly basis, the Mayor's Office for London asks residents, do you think the police do a good job in your local area? And we get the results of that. So the last survey for that was back in March. We're expecting new results fairly soon. But in terms of the March response to that, 49% of Haringey respondents said they did feel that the police did a good job in the local area. And that's pretty much exactly the same as the London average. Again, we don't just want to be, average for London, but Haringey has always been in the bottom 5 until about the last 12 months or so for this measure, often in the bottom or the bottom third, in fact. So to be mid-table and in line with London average is an improvement, but still, again, still a way to go, clearly, in terms of improving public confidence in policing, not just in Haringey, but London-wide, I think. I won't dwell on too many of these statistics going forward, but just to draw attention to a few pertinent parts. On the next slide, which is page number 80 in your pack, you can see the overall trend in crime. So this page here, total recorded crime, this is all crime that takes place or has been recorded as having taken place within the borough. So you'll see the dotted line there is the average, so essentially the baseline level of crime, and we'd hope to be below that if we're doing well. And as you can see, generally speaking, there's been a few ups and downs, but we are seeing a downward trend over this long term. And the next slide here, which is page number 81 in your pack, shows the crime distribution across the borough. Now, the eagle-eyed among you will obviously have noticed that these are the old ward boundaries rather than the new alignment. Yes, and that is correct. We are waiting for the police to update their systems to align the crime with the new ward boundaries. So until that point, unfortunately, we're stuck with the old ward boundaries, but we are hoping to get that sooner rather than later. And as you can see, and perhaps not a real surprise to many of those in the room, towards the east of the borough, we tend to get higher volumes of crime. So wards such as Knoll Park, Northumberland Park and Tottenham Green are where we tend to get the highest volumes of crime. Whereas towards the west of the borough, for example, Highgate, Alexander and Fortis Green, those are the 3 lowest volume crime wards. Just a couple more slides before I pause, perhaps to open up a discussion rather. The next slide here shows the violence with injury. So essentially this is street-based violence taking place. As I did mention, we are seeing increases within street-based violence, 22% increase in the last year. And as you can see, towards the last few months, the last bunch of that data there, the red line, which is how many we've had, has been above the average in terms of the levels that we're seeing. And the next slide just shows where that is spread across the borough. So again, fairly similar to the overall crime picture. Again, Tottenham Green, Northumberland Park and Knoll Park tend to be the highest volume wards. The next slide looks at personal robbery. I mentioned we've seen reductions in personal robbery, and you can see that highlighted within this chart. Again, the blue line is the baseline we'd hope to be under, and for many months now we have remained below that, which I think is a testament to a lot of the partnership work being done, which I think Joe will talk about a little bit later. So that is a positive story, I think, but still a way to go in order to continue to safeguard young people, particularly who are victims of robbery more often than some others. And the distribution of that, which is shown on the next slide there, again, shows that towards the east of the borough, particularly towards the southeast corner, we do tend to see the higher volumes of robberies taking place. And very finally, just looking at knife crime very briefly, which is slide number 86. Again, the trend for knife crime, generally speaking, we have managed to stay below our previous baselines for our knife crime offences. There have been a few months where we have been above that, but I think a lot of the partnership work that has been done over the last couple of years really has contributed to some of those reductions. And the very final slide there just looks at the distribution of that. And again, you'll notice a theme that we are seeing some of the similar wards where we tend to get the highest volume of most of our crime types. So that's the end of the slide deck here. I'll just hand over to Gavin.
So, Chair, it might be useful if we could ask Joe Benmore to give his presentation, because it may well be that some of the questions that have arisen from that can be covered by Joe, so we'll get a complete overview of the community safety, if that's okay with you.
Thank you very much. Joe, can you proceed?
Yeah, I don't. This is Appendix B in your pack. I don't know the page number, Phil. 89. Page 89. Okay, so this is just an overview of some of the community safety work streams that are already in place to try to support some of these reductions that Sandeep's talked about, and also to meet some of the challenges, especially around serious youth violence and other serious incidents that occur in Haringey. In terms of the community safety team, Sandeep's already detailed that the main MOPAC priorities, the key crime priorities for Haringey for this year are non-domestic violence with injury and robbery, and he's already talked about some of the things that we've seen over the last 3 years in terms of some of those reductions. Most of the kind of interventions that are linked to community safety provision are reliant on grant funding from MOPAC. And this is predominantly made up of funding from the local crime prevention fund and from the violence reduction unit. We are currently in a 3-year funding cycle, and this has been broken down as follows. We receive just over £550,000 from MOPAC for our London local crime prevention funded projects. We also receive £200,000 per annum from the VRU to work with serious youth violence and young people to reduce some of the crime and criminality that group faces. The combined annual funding is spent on to support key activities that are linked to the police and crime plan, with a focus on reducing violence with injury, especially serious youth violence, which is a major issue in London and nationally at the moment, but also to reduce robberies. And some of those key interventions are centred around an integrated gangs unit that works exclusively with young people up to the age of 25 who are involved in gang culture. We have Haringey Community Gold, which is made up of several interventions that work with young people out in the community, in the estates where they live, and trying to identify and engage with what we used to call those harder to reach groups. I'd argue that we've needed to improve on how we communicate and engage with those groups for a number of years, and Haringey Gold has helped us to bridge some of those barriers. We also fund substance misuse and offending, so anything linked to substance misuse, which is Class A, drug dealing, that kind of stuff. We've got a substantial amount of money that goes to support some projects that they run. Hate crime prevention is another key priority for us in Haringey. We've seen a slight increase over the last couple of years in hate crimes nationally, not just in Haringey, and we've got a provision now to coordinate some of that activity and some of those interventions around that. Equally, ASB victims, we have, the panel may have noted in recent news articles that ASB just went through the roof nationally, especially during the pandemic. And one of the key priorities for us is to work with those victims. Those victims are, repeat victims often, and are struggling and suffering at the hands of others. Violence against women and girls is another key priority for us. We have projects and we support projects to work with school children. So we're funding what's called a KIDVA, which is a specialist worker that will go into schools and work with young girls and boys up until the age of school leaving age, and it's really around safety and just ensuring that young girls especially are aware of some of the risks and how to identify them. And then finally, we have provision for a prison worker that's based at Pentonville Prison, and this worker works directly with young people that are either on remand or sentenced at Pentonville Prison. They can often come from a couple of the groups that operate around here, for example, Wood Green Mob or Northumberland Park Killers or other groups in London. And the idea is to develop those young men and to with strength-based kind of co-produce work to try to produce community champions. So when they come out of prison, they're an asset in terms of trying to reduce some of the stuff that we're seeing on the street in terms of diversion and prevention. Some of the other things that we do, Sandeep's attached to the community safety team, and we work alongside the police, utilising what we call victim offender location time analysis, which is basically looking at our hotspot areas that Sandeep outlined, Tottenham, Wood Green and others, and looking at the number of crimes that occur there and the people that are most at risk. And what we then do is we deploy those resources to those areas. And these are not just the police. So we know that police can't arrest their way out of this. We're very clear about this. And it's a partnership response. And what we try to do is encourage a whole system response to this. So this is children's police, community safety, and you name it. And one of the I suppose benefits of doing that is it helps us to deploy resources effectively, because Haringey is quite a big borough, and we have a limited amount of capacity and resources within our own group. So that has, I think, helped to contribute to some of those reductions that Sandeep talked about. For example, the robberies that we were seeing in Tottenham, etc. We attend daily violence group meetings with the police. So every day, every morning, we dial into a violence group meeting with the senior leaders at Wood Green Police Station. And basically the purpose of that is to look at any overnight incidents, to look at any intelligence that suggests there's an increase in community tensions. Often these things are played out on social media, so we get kind of a bit of a heads up if something is looking like it's going to kick off. And again, this is just to drive down some of those knife crimes and obviously incidents where young people are being, injured and stabbed. We have a monthly partnership problem solving group. This brings together partners from across the council and external colleagues as well, such as probation, community payback and teams like that. And the idea of this is to, again, similar to the approach we have to deploying resources, it's to look at particular problem areas or problem locations and to develop an action plan to try to reduce some of that. That could just be some of the broken window stuff, so just doing a bit of cleansing, or it could be more than that. It could be, outreach workers going out and working directly with people out on the street. That could be substance misusers, it could be homeless individuals, or it could be young people that are at risk of crime. We have location-based working groups. So in the last year, we've developed a couple of real focus groups around Turnpike Lane, for example, where we deployed significant resource around there to try and drive down some of the crime. ASB, I'm sure if you've walked up and down Wood Green High Road, hopefully you've never been approached to buy drugs, but there was a point where it was literally, it was rife. So, and that's worked really well, and we've seen some good outcomes. I was hoping to have brought some of those today, but maybe for another meeting, but we have had some really positive outcomes from that. And we've also got just finished a group that's been working around Northumberland Park, similarly to try to drive down some of the robberies and incidents of violence in and around that area. As I said, we have engagement and outreach workers who we will deploy to areas of high harm. A good example of that is Wood Green. We were experiencing some on 2 occasions there was some serious public disorder with young people descending on Wood Green, and there was a couple of fights, a few went viral, etc. And the strategy around that is to get people that are credible to them. So a lot of the outreach workers are just like the young people they're talking to, and that kind of, as I said earlier, that gives us a bridge and also helps us to identify young people that might be at risk, as well as develop intelligence around that group, so that we can kind of get ahead of the game in terms of any issues. Excuse me. We have a Operation Divert, which is a mental health diversion intervention, which is based at Wood Green Custody Suite. The idea of this is any young person that comes in for any offence, there's an outreach worker that will go and engage with them immediately and identify if there are any mental health needs. And the idea of this is to reduce the number of FTEs into our court system, which has kind of been a long-standing aim of us, and we are seeing some impact from that in terms of young people being diverted into other interventions that don't involve a court process. I'm going to try and race through this quickly, apologies. North Area Violence Reduction Group, this is a MOPAC-led group. We are within the police service in Haringey is a double borough, so it works with Enfield. So it's called the Borough Command Unit, consists of Haringey and Enfield. So the North Area Violence Reduction Unit sits across both boroughs. It's actually good for us because we do see a lot of issues coming from Enfield in terms of gangs, serious youth violence. So it's a good way for us to keep a handle on what's kind of going on across the border. The aim of the group, again, is to reduce serious youth violence, to divert more children away from crime, and also to provide interventions that meet their needs. And again, this relies on partnership work. So lots of agencies are involved: public health, police, etc., schools, you name it. In terms of other projects, I'm just going to quickly run through. We've got youth justice, serious youth violence workers who work in the community and work with young people that are in custody in terms of pre-release work. We have substance misuse intervention and mental health services, council services such as housing, children's services, etc., working together around it. So it's a kind of a team around the person. We have an accident and emergency-based victim support worker that works at North Middlesex Hospital, and that person is, if you like, is able to engage with young people when they first come into that environment, and often that's the time when you can have that critical conversations, because young people are often feeling very vulnerable at that time. We have prison-based provision, as I said, through Myers Project at Pentonville, and as I said, we've got the independent domestic violence advocates for children that are going to start working in our schools. Some other community provision. We have RISE, which is a Somali-based outreach group that works specifically with Somali young men. We know up until a few years ago, we had an established organised criminal group that was mainly based of Somali young men operating in Haringey, and the idea with this is to try to engage with that group on a level that we've not been able to up until quite recently, and we are making inroads into that, into the Somali population. But again, this gives us that kind of I suppose that bridge into some of those younger people to see kind of what their needs are. I'm not going to go through all of these, there's a few, it's in your pack. Tottenham Hotspur Foundation, again, a really good resource for us in terms of alternative provision, after school provision for young people. The key times for us is between 3 and 8 o'clock in the evening, so a lot of the projects are kind of based around those times. We've got the Home Cooked project in Tottenham. Now, this is a MOPAC funded voluntary sector project that we support strategically, and this is very much a grassroots project. I think the project funding is around £500,000 for 3 years, and this is again co-produced by the people that use that project in Tottenham Hale, and the idea is then to use the skills and the ideas that they build up around working with young people in that community, and again that drives down some of the issues that we see. And again, Tottenham Hale is very much a robbery hotspot and has been for a number of years. And then we've got things like Project 2020, Wood Green Rising, which is a new youth space opening in Wood Green in late July, and Bruce Growth Youth Space in Tottenham. And then just lastly, a couple of other projects that we support are Project Future. Again, this is a project that works with young people in Northumberland Park. Again, this cohort of young people are what we would consider the most at risk. They're either heavily involved in gang culture and criminality, or are at risk of involvement. And again, this is about developing agency with that group so that they feel agency and they feel a sense of community belonging. It's about systems change, and it's very much a therapeutic, psychological kind of intervention, which has which the group, sorry, I was going to say we, it's not me, which and the project itself has won several awards for the work it does, and I would encourage you to look them up. I mean, it's a fantastic project. We're lucky to have it, and that's kind of just a very quick run through. The rest is in your pack, but obviously I'm here to answer any questions.
Has anybody got any questions that they would like to direct? So can I have Eldridge first? He had his hand up first, please.
For me, it's trauma approach. It's trauma-based approaches where you have where you take the intervention to where the young people live. So things like Project Future, there's 3 Miles project in Pentonville, where you have that one-to-one engagement. And that real partnership working, councillor, as well. So everybody taking responsibility to try to resolve some of the issues. So I would say face-to-face working has the most impact.
Councillor Worrell, and then Dunstall, sorry.
Thank you. This might be a question for you or for Gavin, I'm not sure, or Sandeep, but what's your analysis of where there is quite a big discrepancy in either the growth or the reduction of a particular crime between wards, and maybe not that's different demographically? So, like, for example, with the personal robbery in Tottenham Green, that's increased by 49%, but in Northumberland Park, that's decreased by 18%. I was just wondering what you thought were the drivers behind that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I think it's a really sound question. I think certainly a lot of the work that we do in terms of trying to tackle, for example, robbery, a lot of the work we do, for example, for violence and knife crime, a lot of it crosses over, I think, and in particular with Northumberland Park, which I think is a good example. We did for probably about 6 to 8 months have a really tight focus within the Northumberland Park area under what was known as Operation Taipan. So working with the police, working with partners, working with third-party organisations and the community to really have a concerted approach in Northumberland Park. And I think that was part of what drove some of the reductions being seen in that particular location. I think with some of the other areas, I think it's not just about necessarily socio-demographic build-up, but sometimes the geographical build-up and the kind of things that are in that ward. So, for example, areas with large shopping centres, transport hubs, busy thoroughfares, they're likely to be the ones where we're likely to see increasing crime, particularly as footfall has now returned back to essentially pre-COVID levels. So those are the areas where we're seeing the biggest increase, and I think those are some of the kind of key things, really.
Go ahead.
Sorry, if I can just add, Chair, sorry.
Yes, please go ahead.
So, I mean, one of the things that we do find, even in the small scale and in terms of the larger scale, is the moment you put a concentrated effort in one area, it actually pushes it to another. So even in, you know, when we've done walkabouts in Northumberland Park with the police, they're concentrating on one particular part of it, and then all of a sudden they find people are crossing the road and creating the problems in another part. So there is an element of that. I don't think we've done the analysis, but that's certainly anecdotally we do find that.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Oh, first of all, yeah. Thank you. So, yeah, that was really, really interesting. There's loads of data in there. Obviously, you said at the beginning, Sandeep, that obviously working with limited resources, mostly by grant funding. What I didn't see in here was anything about understanding the characteristics of offenders. So obviously, we know there's a youth violence problem in Haringey and London more broadly, but there's obviously substance misuse issues and crime related to homelessness and stuff like that. Do we allocate our funding or look at that in the round as well, and taking that into consideration when allocating funding, or do we just pick those focus areas because we know that, you know, we need to reach those young people that are involved in that activity?
Yeah, thank you. So often the issues that are linked to young people are multi-complex issues. So what we often find is there's lots of different services working with them already. So they might already be known to early help, for example, or children's services, or might have, you know, issues, hidden harm issues with parents that are involved in crime, etc. So I think as part of our analysis, we do temporal analysis. So we look at times, for example, we look at gender-based analysis, you know, which groups are more impacted, you know, and what types of complexities are involved in their life. What we do know is the young people that are predominantly at risk of crime are usually young people that are not doing too well at school, so low attainment, or have underlying or undiagnosed emotional difficulties, which could be connected with lifestyle. A thing that always struck me, actually, going back a few years ago, was when we were talking to young people, one of the things they said to us is, it's really, this is Project 2020, which I mentioned earlier, which is basically a homework club for young people to go to. And one of the things they said is, I can't do my homework at home, it's too chaotic. I need somewhere to go to work. And so what we're often trying to do is to unpick that in a kind of multi-agency way. Does that make sense? And so that's why I think that there's a need to have that kind of team around the person, because those issues have to be, and they're often long-standing. So there's a kind of a bit of a long haul to try to undo some and unpick some of that. So I think, as I said to Councillor Culverwell, I think that kind of direct contact with young people, their families, offenders, women, for example, who are offenders as well, that direct face-to-face contact, that kind of hand-holding type work really has that impact, because that starts to build trust and confidence again. So I hope that answered your question, but it is so multi-complicated.
Councillor Dunstall, have you got anything else that you'd like to add? Go ahead.
That's really helpful, thank you. And I guess the other thing I was just sort of trying to get at was, I don't know, we've seen that increase in non-domestic violent crime. Do we have an understanding that, like, all of that is attributable to young people, or is there an older cohort, and we need to sort of, how do we allocate stuff around sort of acknowledging that, yeah, different characteristics of offenders, I suppose.
Can you come back on that, please? Can you answer?
Yep, sure, absolutely. Yep, certainly. So we do carry out that analysis. So I think Joe mentioned the North Area Violence Reduction Group. So that's one of the key areas where we do that kind of really micro analysis of violence in particular. So we look at, as Joe said, you know, genders and ages, but also look at other things like links to deprivation and links to some of those other challenges. So when we do see increases, as we know, increases might not be equal across the borough, be that in terms of where they're located, but also in terms of the types of people that they might affect. So we do our best to try to unpick that, but I think sometimes, you know, we're limited by the data that we do have. So we try to understand the best picture we have, and then through kind of community safety partnership, that's where we link in more widely across other services, like, for example, children's services, adult services, and making sure that we have all that information kind of in the round to try to make the picture more rich, I suppose, because this is the data and information, but then actually we make it far richer when we kind of link in with the wider information.
So I think also from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not just based on kind of location, it's also based on victim and offender. So that analysis, that vault analysis, helps determine how resources are prioritised, particularly from the police. So some of the time we may be looking at the location, some of the time we may be looking at who are the offenders and that sort of analysis. So those kind of themes follow, I think, the way that the Met Police look at things in terms of how they deal with kind of crime. So it's not, I get it, you could look at a map and think, well, you just placing people in there, surely there's more analysis than that. No, the answer is there is, and those are the things that determine the priorities of what things are kind of looked at, both on a proactive and a reactive way.
Thank you. There is Councillor Da Costa, and then Councillor Tammy Hymas, and Councillor Alexandra Worrell, oh my goodness, and Councillor Eldridge, and I have 3 questions for you as well.
This is the problem on scrutiny. You answer the questions so well that you create even more questions that people ask. I've got a question with regards to the location-based working groups, which you said have been a very effective way of sort of dealing with pinpointed areas. You highlighted Turnpike Lane, Wood Green High Road, and Northumberland Park areas. What other areas are you looking at to put that into effect?
Yeah, thank you. So Finsbury Park is another area. The park itself has, I suppose, developed a bit of a reputation of being unsafe. There was a quite kind of a high-profile murder several years ago, 2017, I believe. What we don't find is a lot of crime taking place in the park itself, but the public perception around that is it's very unsafe. It borders 3 boroughs, for example, so Islington and Hackney, as well as Haringey. There are pockets around the park of, you know, kind of significant drug dealing and violence that's linked to kind of the drug supply chain that goes on around there. So that's another area of high priority for us. Tottenham Hale as well. We know that it's a kind of a hotspot for schoolboy robberies, so we have a lot of focus around there between sort of 3 o'clock in the afternoon till around 8 o'clock, and we work very closely with the SNT to kind of try and manage that. The other key bit for us is working with the schools as well. So we have over the last couple of years, we've really developed our relationships with schools. Schools used to be quite guarded. They didn't want that reputation of being a school that had kids with issues, and it took us a long time to break that down. But now it's a lot more open, so we work through Operation Dharma, which is a police and sort of joint-led operation that really provides a forum for all the schools in Haringey and Enfield to come together to look at some of the issues. So, for example, that issue that we had in Wood Green, a lot of the I'm not going to put it down to this, but I believe potentially it was because we briefed the schools were then able to brief the kids. You're not going to Wood Green after school, you go home. And the parents are involved in that too. So that kind of reactive working can have an impact. I would say most of our activity is in the east of the borough for the reasons Sandeep outlined, because that's where we see most of the issues. So think about Tottenham High Road, Northumberland Park, Bruce Grove, the area around Broadwater Farm gets a lot of focus for us, as well as Tottenham Hale and Seven Sisters Station. Those are the kind of areas that we really focus on, as well as I said earlier, Wood Green, and more so Turnpark Lane, Duckett's Common. But Wood Green itself has a history of incidents that are very serious.
Can I ask Gavin to you've raised your hand. Did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I'm thinking you're touching on a point where you do Turnpark Lane, kind of where next and what the effect is of that. So it's very effective when things become perhaps where there's a feeling that things are going in the wrong direction, of bringing things back down to perhaps what we might see as more of a normal level. But one of the things that we are kind of developing, and we know was the Labour Group's kind of manifesto was about these action weeks as well, where we will be looking at our crime statistics and looking to get a multi-agency approach for a week in particular kind of areas. And I would have thought that will be spread out across all of the borough where we know there may be particular problems. That's just partly, it's a visual thing as well, giving confidence in the community that the council and its partners are kind of out there in the community. So I just thought of that when you were thinking of it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tammy Hymas, please.
Yeah, I had a question about the key priorities. So I can see here that the violence with injury, the domestic, the offences are 777. Do you think that reflects the full extent of domestic violence in the borough, particularly given, only about 18% of women who experienced partner abuse in the last 12 months actually reported that abuse to the police?
The short answer is no. What we do know is that there is a significant underreporting of domestic violence. Women will often report to third-party reporting schemes such as women's domestic violence charities, for example. Police colleagues aren't here, so I don't want to kind of delve into kind of some of the politics around this, but there is, I guess, a lack of trust in police and how they will process the case, which the police are doing a lot of work around. There's a VORG strategy that's been developed in Haringey, which really has really refreshed the approach from the police into how they will process complaints. The other bit is convincing women that it's safe to report. So sometimes what we'd love to see, it's a really weird thing to say, but what I'd like to see is increased reports. So I'd love to see that figure double, because I think that probably would be more reflective. But this is an intrangent problem. It's been a problem for years. Women just often don't feel safe going through the criminal justice process, unfortunately.
Thank you. Would you like to come back, Councillor Hymas?
Yeah, I appreciate that the offences are underreported, but does that not mean as a community we need to respond to that with an acknowledgement that when we're doing community safety work, that one of the biggest areas where people are unsafe is in the home rather than on the streets necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. And there's a lot of work that we do need to do around understanding the prevalence of domestic abuse and hidden harm. We knew, for example, during lockdown, there was a real concern and fear amongst obviously people that I work with, police and others, that women were trapped in situations that they were not allowed to get out of because they'd be breaking the law. And we predicted that we would see a kind of an increase in reporting following lockdown. I don't know if that's kind of been borne out, Sandeep, but we were seeing slight increases, but not to the levels that we expected. So I think that the answer to your question is yes, I completely agree. There needs to be more focus on how we respond to violence in the home. And again, that's something that we do alongside colleagues from public health who kind of manage the violence against women and girls piece. And there are kind of MOPAC London-wide strategies as well as local strategies that we are utilising, especially in the wake of some recent high-profile murders of women and women's general concerns about their safety.
I would just like to add something to that in the pandemic, as you rightfully alluded to, that women will tend to go to people who they feel safe to report to. And I personally had my living room filled with women who were trying to escape domestic abuse. And there was one occasion where 3 o'clock in the morning, I had a woman there and I had to call the police. And to be honest, the strategy which they implemented after that was not helpful. And I would like to call the police here to see. There's one thing about reporting it, being brave enough to report it, but how that's managed afterwards and how the police are working with those third-party groups. That's something that I would like to see, actually. And Tammy and then Ali, Councillor Worrell, is that okay?
It's on the same point. It seems like the police are more interested in, stop and searching young black kids on the street and creating more trauma than they are actually tackling this massive issue where there is no trust in the ability of the police to solve it.
Chair, can I make a suggestion, Chair, maybe for a future panel meeting to invite the police? I think Detective Inspector Sebastian Ajay is leading on this, and he might. And I'm sure he'd be happy to come along and discuss this and answer any questions, etc., in terms of the processes and procedures that are in place and are planned going forward.
Yes, because I'm exceptionally passionate about that. My cousin was Valerie Ford, and she was murdered in Hackney by the police, and my father was there with her mother when they had to remove her body from there, and she had reported it to police. And I'm sure everybody publicly knows what happened there, and that still traumatized our family. So that's why I'm very passionate about abuse against women, because it's underreported, and especially if you're black, as a black woman, you are not taken, the statistics are borne out with that. So I would be really keen to have the police come here and look at what strategies they are putting in place, not just for arresting the offender, but how are you creating that environment for women to feel safe to report and the consequences of that. I will share that I had to take out a complaint with the woman about the police, because by the time she got to the reporting, the police were saying to her, "Are you really sure you want to do this?" After she had taken so much energy to get there, that was after years, and that just, it decimated it. And so I'm trying to build her up, try and get out of this cycle of domestic violence. So I stand with you on that. And bringing in Alexandra, please.
Thank you. Yeah, this point is kind of related, but a bit broader, because I was kind of noticed that the figures are about crimes reported, and I wondered if you collected data on what proportion of those crimes are actually able to be followed up by the police, because I know that there are, massive resource issues, and that's as much a national policy issue as it is local. But I think it would be quite useful to have that data, because that very much affects a resident's experience of crime and how the police there responds and their ability to feel safe. And I'd also be interested to know if the data is available kind of going more granular, like between crimes and down to sort of ward level in the same way that the reporting statistics are?
No, thank you. In terms of police follow-up and that data, there is some data that the police publish on that. So, for example, police define a sanction detection as a crime being reported and then essentially someone being brought to justice for that crime. In Haringey, the rate for that is around about 7.5%. So what that means is essentially 7.5% of all reported crimes result in somebody, receiving some kind of a punishment for having done that. And that's just about slightly below the London average. London average is closer to 8%. That kind of tells you that the general kind of overview of how many offenders are brought to justice. So we have about 29,000 crimes. It's around about 7.5% of that where somebody's brought to justice. Now that does vary for different crime types. So for theft offences, for example, there's a very low sanction detection because there's not much information on, for example, a pickpocketer if nobody saw who that individual was. But in other more serious incidences, for example, knife crime incidences or instances that are more confrontational where there is more information that the victim can provide about the perpetrator or other witnesses, then those sanction detection rates tend to be a lot higher. But overall, it's around about 7.5%.
Please come back.
Sorry, just very quickly. Yeah, thank you. I think, I don't know, just to sort of raise the point that I think it would be really useful to have that data going down to ward level, if I can just make that plea. And I guess when you speak about, something like theft, robbery, I get that there are way more serious crimes that we need to deal with. But I think many residents have probably had an experience where, there's probably CCTV footage of the bag being stolen, or they can see where their card has been used, and a well-resourced police force would be able to do something and at least look into it a little bit, but you just know that that's not going to happen, and that is often, I guess, the experience. It's not necessarily just down to we don't have any more information to go on. I appreciate that's very much a national thing as well as local.
I think from sort of an overview is that all of the things of which you're kind of mentioning are things that we also feel really passionate about as well. So I just wanted to put that out there that, we work in community, safety, and all of the things of which you're raising are the things that get sort of discussed. But I think if you want a detailed discussion, I think that it needs to be the police themselves who can kind of say what their approach is. I think the one thing that is positive is that the confidence in policing in Haringey has improved as a whole. So if we look at the national trend, of Sandeep's given us an overview that we were in very much the bottom quartile, we're now in the middle quartile. Great if that improves, but we're certainly not right down at the bottom. So that perhaps is a positive. That's not to say there isn't lots of work to do and to continue to do. When I've done the sort of ward walks with the local police, I find them all to be very passionate in the work that they do. I'm sure that there are other people who have other experiences of more of the sort of some of the response work that is done, and we know that there are potential issues there. So I guess I just wanted to sort of put out there that we're on the same team, as it were. We're all trying to achieve the same aim. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Chair, can I also suggest for the next panel meeting that alongside the police, Will Maymaris, who leads on public health, can come and give a brief update on VORG and council VORG practices, because they'll be very much aligned with obviously the police strategy as well. So hopefully that will give you some richer data around some of the strategies and processes and procedures, and especially around some of those sanction and detection rates. I can say that they are low for domestic violence. I'll say that, but it's as I think Gavin said. I think it'd be a more quality if the police come along and kind of outline that to you from their point of view.
Thank you very much. I don't know what the availability. The next meeting's on the 5th of September, is it not?
Yes, Chair. So, yeah, I mean, we're still developing the work plan. I was going to suggest that we, in the past, have invited the Borough Commander to come to a meeting. That's usually the November meeting. So perhaps we could combine inviting the Detective Inspector you referenced along with the Borough Commander and have a sort of community-themed, community policing-based agenda for the November meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. That sounds very reasonable. Did you want to come back? Because I've got 3 questions I want to ask. So maybe
You're the chair.
Can I rock and roll with that? No, I have to be courteous. Okay, they are 3 things that I'd like to ask. First of all, in relation to the key crime priorities for Haringey for 2022 and 2023, and there's a list of them. How did they get this strategy? How were there task and finish groups? How did they galvanize? How did they arrive at this destination that these were going to be the key priorities for Haringey?
Yep, so I can start with that one. So essentially, MOPAC engage with every borough on an annual basis. They work with community safety partnerships and also working with the police, particularly the borough commander. And based on kind of data and the analysis and information that they have, based on some of the stuff we've already spoken about, that's where we kind of almost have a conversation with MOPAC to jointly decide on what we feel are some of the key focus areas. So that's how the 2 categories of non-domestic violence with injury and robbery have been chosen as 2 of Haringey's priorities. And alongside that, as a whole, London has what's known as the London Police and Crime Plan, which covers 2022 to 2025, so the 3-year period. So under that, so under kind of Sadiq Khan and his plan for the whole of London, that's where the additional areas of focus crimes are almost kind of areas that we additionally have to focus on alongside the 2 chosen local priorities of the street-based and non-domestic violence, injury and robbery. So that's how that list came about.
Thank you, and that feeds nicely into the next question that I have. I will consider myself, and I describe myself always as a daughter of the soil of Haringey because I was born and raised here. And I was listening to the projects that you have spoken about, and I am familiar with a lot of them. And considering that I work in mental health anyway, so Project Future and all of that is embedded in Barnet, Enfield and Haringey. The other thing it kind of comes back to me again and again that there are grassroots projects which you're not connected to. There is a project called the King's Peace Treaty, and I don't know if you're familiar with that. That is somebody who has worked relentlessly across Tottenham, across Haringey, and he has the King's Peace Treaty, and he is so effective in combating crime, and he's one of the movers and shakers of the community. There is also another project which aligns itself to Hackney and both Haringey, and it's Pray for Our Youth. And that is another project within the African Caribbean community that works relentlessly. And I would like to see grassroots projects. I've only mentioned 2, but there are many other grassroots projects that underpin, and you will get much more influence. And I would like to see the police and the community agents reach out to those projects who are visible in the community. And I think that needs to happen. So I'm happy to share that information with you.
I can quickly come back on that. So in terms of the grassroots stuff, there's the My Ends project in Tottenham Hale, which is, as I said, it's a voluntary sector-run project. Within that project, there are 5 consortium providers: Father to Father, NCLP, a couple of others, which I can't remember, Godwin Lawson Foundation, and a couple of others who are basically grassroots organisations. One of the issues that we find with grassroots organisations, if I'm being honest, is they don't have a lot of project management skills, and often providers have strict reporting requirements. So one of the things that we're looking to do is to develop that expertise. So our strategic partnership with My Ends is around just helping grassroots organisations like the ones you've mentioned come to us. We can advise them on how to develop a bid, how to develop a proposal. One thing I'm really keen about is that we are not, if you like, we're not running the projects. I think you're right, grassroots projects have the biggest impact. I can certainly testify to that. So what we're trying to do is skill up some of those grassroots projects so that they are able to meet requirements, any funding requirements, because often that can be a bit of a sticking point in terms of funders and wanting to fund these projects. But MOPAC have kind of, over the last couple of years, have become more open to that. So they have events that are held at MOPAC. I can pass those details on to you for grassroots providers to go along and kind of get knowledge and expertise around how to apply for some of the funding. So yeah, I completely share your view there, Chair.
Yeah, because these people are doing it with no funding at all, but out of desperation and frustration, and having too many of our youth and our grandchildren and children dying on the streets of Tottenham. That is the main driver. So if you are able to skill them up and, provide those things, but they need to be aligned to the bigger project. You can't have people in isolation working one, it's not just effective. The last question which I do have is that you did mention throughout the project, giving your report, that there were increases in crime, and you did touch on what happens when the increases happen. And I am just curious to know that when you see that, is it like a red flag or an alert that the crime is increasing in that area, or the surveillance has happened? You did mention that you have like a deep dive in the morning with the police. Is that the only source that shows you, or do you have reporting? Because when crimes happen, before it gets to the police station, we've seen it in our communities, we've heard it in our wards, somebody else has told somebody else. So if you are really connected, you feel that as well. And I'm just wondering if there's an absence of underreporting, is that we maybe can have more of a link as councillors to report the crimes that are reported to us, that the people don't feel confident about going to the police directly. Is that a very long question? Do you understand it?
I'm sure Joe will add, but I think you've touched on something that our own chief exec touched on this morning about, using our young people in terms of social media and some of the things that they might hear and how that gets to us. There's a lot of work that goes on, particularly through Community Gold with the youth. We do, and we get that kind of feedback. We also get feedback that relates to kind of hate crime, so that's kind of monitored as well. So it's not just a case of we just listen to the police, hear about a crime and then do something. So I think particularly with our outreach workers, we get a lot of information, some of it through kind of some of the projects that are being run. But I think there is something about, could we do better on some of the kind of more social media? We probably could, and maybe that's an area that we can try and look at. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, but there's always room for improvement. Joe?
So I'll just add a little bit more to that. So Gavin touched on our community tensions monitoring. So this goes out to all of our partners. It's not just council. This goes out to community groups, everybody sort of in Haringey. And the idea of that is for community members to kind of come and say, I'm worried about an incident that occurred in the flats last night, or something occurred on Acacia Avenue that's a bit of a worry. We haven't reported it to the police. And basically what that does then is it gives us a rich kind of detailed intelligence map, if you like. And as part of my ongoing discussions and Sandeep's and Gavin's with the police, we are a critical friend, basically. So we will challenge the police around kind of deployments of resources. One big complaint we get from our communities is that the police are always abstracted to other places. So 1 minute there's 3 police in the area, you see them every day, or you only see them drive past in a car, and then there's no police around, And so we are always constantly pushing back on the police, saying, this community is struggling. So for example, when we saw the increase in robberies around Tottenham a few years ago, we've really pushed and challenged the police to do something about it. So it is a bit of a kind of a two-way street in terms of that. We would love our communities to be able to go directly to the police and report crime. Often they struggle with that because 101 doesn't always work. The online reporting system feels a bit arm's length, and people just don't feel like they're being taken seriously when they report crime. So you just generally get fed up and you just don't bother, and that's kind of what happens. So our key focus is to try to build up that trust and confidence. It's not just for the police, it's for systems in general, the council, and other systems are, there's a real need to do that. So over the next year, we're going to start looking at things like weeks of action in the borough, where we will, across the whole of the Haringey, not just in the east, but across the west wards as well, we will be going into those wards for a whole week. We'll have a spot in the local library, for example, for members of the community to come in and talk to us. There'll be police officers from the local Safer Neighbourhoods team available on those weeks, and we'll do everything. We'll cleanse, we'll clean up the graffiti, we'll fix them and fix the broken windows. The idea of that is to start building some of that trust and confidence back. So when you're hearing these things, we're hearing them too. And often, sometimes we're a little bit behind the game. So I think Gavin's right. There's a lot of work that we're planning to do this year to really improve some of those areas.
That's really refreshing to hear. And can I go back? Oh, Councillor Eldridge.
Yeah. Interestingly, you talked about talking to the people. Is there not a fear that they are snitching on each other? And how do you handle that?
That depends where you are. So, for example, in some of our estates, residents are too scared to report crime, too scared to report ASB because they feel that there'll be repercussions. Now, I don't think that's right, personally. And what I'd like to be able to do is, I think, as I said earlier, is I don't think we should sort of all sit in our ivory tower at the council HQ. We need to be out there with our residents, talking to our residents in the community. Councillor, one of the ways to overcome that is to have that presence, to have that visible presence. So a good example of that is the work we did in Northumberland Park, and I think one of our colleagues mentioned that there'd been a reduction there. That's simply because residents now come and talk to us. They talk to the police and say, "Oh, have you heard about so and so going? There's stuff going on, one of the roads around here, or whatever." That is the kind of intelligence that we need, because that allows us to get ahead of the curve, rather than being reactive and waiting until something happens. So you're absolutely right. People are scared and they are reluctant to report. But I think gradually, as you build that trust and confidence, we're hoping that I always use the frame reclaiming our streets, and I think it's about that our communities kind of reclaiming their spaces, because the majority of people in Haringey, including our young people, are don't commit crime, they're doing well at school, everything. There is a small minority that kind of have a bigger impact on some communities, and those communities have developed over the years a kind of a fear of that. But again, I think with some of these things that I just talked about, we're hoping that will start to bridge some of those gaps. I hope that answers it. So we work with children from the age of 8, so transitional age children, so children and their families. So this is around prevention and trying to prevent them getting involved in crime.
Is there any other questions? That's been a lively and robust discussion, and thank you very much. Any other questions? No? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for keeping the pace. The next item on the agenda. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, really quickly, just to go back on a couple of things. So the violence in women against girls is actually part of the, comes under the adults panel. Violence against women and girls comes under the adults panel, but we do have something called women's safety that comes under Councillor Jogi. So when Councillor Jogi comes, you can ask him questions on that. Okay. Previously, the Councillor Hymas was asking about the co-optees. So having looked at the Constitution, it's only the statutory co-optees that are paid an allowance. So the co-optees that sit in overview and scrutiny, and the ones that sit in the pensions committee. The other co-optees, including the person that sits on this board, isn't paid an allowance.
Okay, if we're ready, can we kindly move to the waste and recycling update by Beth Waltzer? Is that okay?
So mine really is just Mine's really just an update on the performance, so it's relatively short, and you've had the report obviously, so I was just going to pick out some of the highlights from that, and then that allows us more time for discussion or questions, if that's okay, Chair.
That's absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you. So the main highlights really to note here are an improvement in our cleansing performance from this year to last year. We are well within the targets. Table 3 under 4.5.1 shows the improvement there. I'm sorry, I'm assuming that everybody knows how NI 195 works.
Well, I don't, so if you can quickly just give us some skeleton.
Sure, okay. So NI 195 is the performance indicator, if you like. It's not a formal reporting indicator anymore, it once was. Essentially, it's split into 4 parts: litter, detritus, graffiti and fly posting. And essentially, each of those elements is graded in terms of a score, which shows the cleanliness level. So actually, the lower the score, the better, the higher the cleanliness is. So obviously we want to get a lower score. So looking at this table here, as you can see in the year-to-date average, so for litter, for example, in 2021, we had 9.6%, and 21-22, it's improved to 5.7%. The target within the Veolia integrated waste and cleansing contract is 11%, so we're well within that target. The same for detritus, we've also seen an improvement. The same for graffiti, we've also seen an improvement. And lastly, an improvement in fly posting. And again, they are all within target. Anecdotally, we believe that one of the contributing factors to this improvement stems from, we were fortunately successful to get some funding from the Welcome Back Fund, which was primarily aimed at improving the cleanliness and appearance of high streets and welcoming people back after COVID. So we put in place 3 mobile rapid response teams that basically went into the high streets across the borough and cleaned areas perhaps that fall out of the contract, what we sort of term grey areas, and generally sort of removed graffiti, did some litter picking, and did some pavement washing as well. So we anecdotally believe that that has contributed to it. In terms of other schemes, if you like, that we believe have contributed to an improvement. Does everybody know about the on-street waste containment project, the boxes? Yeah, okay. So we've obviously, that was part of the Cleaner Haringey strategy. So far, we have now put in the boxes across 13 of the 13 of the Haringey time collection zones have got them, which consist of 178 boxes and 16 larger waste containment units.
These are the black boxes that we see around the borough?
Yeah. So next, Green Lanes one was the most recent installation, and in fact next week the scheme is going to be rolled out in South Tottenham on the High Road M15. Another improvement, although I haven't really talked about that, is from the proactive graffiti service. So last year we introduced a second vehicle to go around proactively, so not just waiting obviously for people to report graffiti, just going around identifying graffiti and cleaning it. And I've already mentioned the improvement there. Something that I believe will significantly improve satisfaction is we are building a new microsite. So essentially for those that have perhaps tried to book a bulky waste service, for example, at the moment you can't do that online. This microsite is going to enable people to do a lot more activities online, which hopefully will make people's lives easier and just be able to use services. That is to say that the contact centre will still continue, but it's just opening up more channels. If I move on to waste and recycling performance, we don't have the final outturn as yet for 21-22, so we're just in the final stages of confirming that. If you look at table 5, just to show here really that we are sort of in the middle pack, if you like, in terms of performance. There's very little in it between Malvern Forest, Islington and ourselves, but we're fourth in that table. Another key development that's going to come in terms of our recycling plans, if you like. So we have a requirement by the Mayor of London to produce a reduction and recycling plan. We have one in place already. It's coming to the point where that needs updating, if you like. So the timescales for that are all in the report, but essentially it will be the 30th of September. We have to start having our plans for how we're planning to increase our recycling. For those that are hopefully aware, we have still continued to have impacts on our services from both COVID absences and also the national HGV driver shortage. We've currently got 6 vacancies on the contract. We have by and large managed to retain our core services throughout the whole time, even COVID. So that is a testament to the crews, but there are delays of up to 72 hours at times if we can't get the staff, and it's obviously something that's affecting all local authorities. And then Appendix 1 just sets out where we've got to on some of our actions under the reuse and recycling plan, and I've detailed some activities that we'll be doing on comms in relation to helping us boost our recycling rate.
So if I can just add, all of the key performance indicators that we have for Veolia are pretty much in target, as I understand.
Yeah, the only exception is the recycling rate, which I have explained in here, as that's reasons beyond the contractor's control. If anyone wanted to know, obviously you can ask me, but I won't just repeat what's in the report.
Thank you very much. Question, can I do a question just before? This is my maiden voyage, being a councillor, being on this board. And one of the main things that I've had 3 surgeries and they're always complaining about the waste collection. That is one of the primary things. So looking at the statistics doesn't marry up to what my constituents are telling me. And you've kind of explained it that there's sometimes a delay in the collection and the HGV drivers. And I'm just wondering how you circumvent that. I don't know if everybody else has got that same issue, that they keep complaining that the waste isn't. And then I go to Councillor Da Costa.
On that point, actually, one thing that would be very useful for residents is if we could report missed bin collections on the Love Streets app, or the Love App Streets. No, that's it. Because if we could, I mean, yeah. But actually, that for residents who are complaining about missed bin collections, being able to do that and then report it, rather than having to go to Veolia service, which takes a while, or coming to us, which is generally weeks after the event or days after the event has happened. That'd be a very quick fix for that.
Are you going to answer that? Because I've got another one in the Councillor Eldridge and also Councillor Dunstall. So,
yeah.
I mean,
would you like?
It's probably best if we get an overview of the initial questions.
Okay.
And then,
okay.
Because some of them may overlap.
All right, we'll roll with that then. So then, Councillor George Dunstall, can you? And then Councillor Alexandra Worrell after Councillor Eldridge. Do you understand that sequence, or do you want me to call you out again? Okay, good.
Thank you. Two points, I guess. The first one is I went on a walkabout a week or so ago with some local residents on the Parkland Walk, the Stroud Green kind of crouch. Stroud Green going up towards Highgate bit. One of the things that was raised by one of the residents there was around graffiti. Now, I know there's lots of graffiti there that is, I would classify as street art, but there's also graffiti that is kind of tags, as it were, and residents sort of raised that they have requested that this graffiti be removed, and it sort of seems to fall between the cracks of Veolia and the Parks team, and just not get kind of resolved. So firstly, any thoughts on that? And the second one is just a kind of observation, having lived in various bits of Haringey for 25 years on and off. it does seem like street litter is a more persistent issue in certain easterly wards than it is in certain westerly wards. And I don't, is that, well, it feels correct, but also are there strategies in place to kind of address some of that? You know, I know where I live in White Hart Lane, for instance, like there simply aren't enough bins. That's just a fact, but sometimes the bins, you know, get set on fire, and that might be why there's not bins. But yeah, just to sort of comment on that.
Thank you. My question was around kind of boosting our recycling rates. Like it looks like things are going relatively well, but obviously we all know in an ideal world we should be aiming much, much, much higher. And I wondered kind of what are the sort of ongoing discussions and what are the sort of longer term strategies about potential new technologies and ways that we can, you know, even if people are not recycling and allocating everything perfectly, how can we get more out of it with the existing in the existing recycling centres?
Councillor Etheridge, did you have a question?
Yes. The NLWA, are they improving facilities for recycling? And what are we doing on a whole, especially in the educational field, to alert teachers and children about the necessity not to throw garbage on the floor, in the ground or wherever?
And then one last one from Councillor Da Costa, and then I'll hand over to my learned panel.
So on-street recycling waste has been identified as needing help, and quite often when you walk around Haringey you see non-recyclable bags in street bins. Other boroughs utilise different shaped bin apertures, let's say, sounds better. And in Haringey, we pretty much have the same bins, just with it's pretty small saying what the different bins are. So are we looking at a different approach to how we do that? The second question is on, sorry, apologies, Chair, on the on-street containment of waste, which went down very well in my previous ward when I was a councillor in Alexandra ward, and is something I know that residents along the Archway Road, which continually have this issue, have been asking us as councillors about. So it'd be interesting to find out what the plans for rollout were on those across the borough.
Do you have all those lists and are you able to respond to them? Yeah. Thank you.
We're going to go now. Thank you. So I couldn't resist it. Sorry, Chair.
So starting at the top, perhaps you could let me know specifically what the complaints are, because it's quite difficult for me to comment on how do I marry up the data versus what people are telling you without knowing specifically what they're about.
Okay. Missed bin collections, which is the bane of my life and other residents' lives. The fact that sometimes they can collect the bins and they are allowed maybe one black bag, so the collections are taking the bin itself and not picking the black bag up and leaving the black bags there. And they are, sometimes the collection, as I said to before, is missed and they don't come back on the next day, but they've left for like 2 other weeks. So these are the things that our surgeries are pregnant with. It is recycling, fly tipping, and non-collection of bins, and also perhaps the collections aren't. I mean, I had a young, not so young, a lady that complained that when they took the bins, there was rubbish that was left and they didn't tidy up. She's an elderly lady, so she was having to do that and asking her neighbours to do it as well. So these are the main features that keep coming through about the waste collection. And I've done, my first members' inquiry was about a waste collection.
So again, I mean, we do have missed bin collections, and I know that I explained earlier that some of the collections are delayed by up to 72 hours because they simply, we're managing it on a daily basis. Sometimes people just don't turn up, that we can't compete with the private sector in terms of wages. So we're losing the turnover of staff. It's really difficult at the moment for the public sector to attract HGV drivers. The long and short of that is that we have to rely on agency staff who, again, don't always show up or decide they're not interested, and most importantly, they're not familiar with the rounds. And in a borough like this, where it's high density housing, there's often little areas that unless you know, you might not necessarily know that the bin is there. So I'm not trying to excuse it, but I'm just trying to sort of yeah, just put it into context. And also we do like 300,000 collections a week. So whilst it might seem like a lot of people are complaining, when you look at it relatively, and I have the data in the report, our miscollection rate is actually quite good. However, please let me know of some of these cases so I can investigate them, because there are cases where they do get missed, and there are cases where we need to work with Veolia to understand why and resolve it. In relation to the bags being left behind, residents do have a recycling collection every week, so there shouldn't necessarily be a need to have additional sacks.
No, I'm not talking about recycling. I'm talking about the bin collection. So they have a bin. This particular issue was they had a bin, the grey bin or black bin, and then it wasn't recyclable waste. It was a bin that they had. So they tied the black bag because it couldn't fit into the bin and put it beside the bin. And what was done was the big bin was taken and the black bag was left.
Yeah, sorry, I did understand that, but the point I'm sort of trying to say is that because there is a recycling collection, they shouldn't necessarily have too much waste to fit in that bin. So perhaps we can help them, because it might be they don't understand what can go in the recycling bin, because there should be enough capacity because they have a recycling collection every week. They're happy to help further on that. Okay.
For bags left by the side of the bin, we pick it up. Yeah, I think the wider point is touching on what you're talking about in terms of education and recycling, in that, you know, we have to take a view that we've gone to the days where the bin man comes around the back, picks up whatever your waste is and dumps it in the back of the lorry. People have to take, and this is about the Haringey deal that we're trying to develop, and that is there is a responsibility that we have. There's also a responsibility that residents have as well in terms of the expectations. One of them relates to the recycling, but we'll go on to talk about that in more depth. I think the general point that Beth was making is that, you know, bin collection is something that everybody has of the council every week, 52 weeks of the year. So it's not unusual, therefore, that your surgeries will have people saying that there may not be something quite right with bin collection, because that is their biggest interaction with the council on a daily basis. I think that what we can only do is benchmark ourselves against other boroughs, benchmark ourselves against the contract, and say, well, actually, on missed bins, we're not doing too bad, particularly against the backdrop of HGV sort of driver issues, and resident satisfaction is above you know, the targets that were set as well. So there will be problems, but everybody likes to complain about, you know, waste. I think that's a kind of, it's not unusual for that to, in my experience, for that to happen. Waste, dog fouling, noise, because they're the services and things that people come across quite regularly. Does that help contextualise it a little bit? Or?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, thank you. And please do let me know where, because we need to address poor performance if that's what it is. So, okay, moving to the Love Clean Streets app. So I mentioned earlier the microsite. That's going to help a lot of more people to report on. To report online in terms of issues like missed, and that will have the ability to report missed bins. I'm not an expert on the Digital Together programme that the council is doing. So I'm not going to pretend that I am, but I believe that a lot of that is about improving access for residents, and I'm guessing that hopefully as part of that we can have a look at the apps and see how they can be improved. I don't know if you know more about the programme then.
Yeah, I must. There is a digital language that I will confess I struggle to always understand, but there are projects even with some of the existing databases that we've got, such as Microsoft, where we're looking at whether or not there are kind of solutions for services, because what we want is an integrated system rather than lots of different services having different systems, and then, if you like, lots of different ways of the front ends talking to those systems, so that it can be quite kind of complex. And I know digital are looking, I mean, I'm not here to talk about it, but I know that they're looking at making sure that there are common platforms that will make the resident experience more user-friendly, I think, in general. But I don't know specifically about waste, but I did get an email today, which I'm going to invite you along to.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And Parkland Walk, again, if you could perhaps send me some information about where the graffiti is, then we can have a look at that. So that, yes, that Veolia does do the graffiti removal on behalf of parks and the sort of on-street graffiti, if you like. So it's just, yeah, understanding whose land it is, and then we'll just get it cleared. It doesn't make any difference, whose land it is between parks and the street graffiti. So yes, if you could just let me know, that'd be really useful. Thank you. In terms of street litter being more prevalent in certain areas, yes, I mean, that's something you're always going to have, dependent on the demographics of an area, the pedestrian footfall, the activity that goes on. Again, I mean, we do monitoring to see where they're not meeting the standards. They are generally meeting the standards. However, that's not to say we have a frequency-based contract here. So everywhere the residential streets are swept once a week, and that's consistent across the borough. So we do, where we can, do additional work to address perhaps some of the areas that are imbalanced. And I think what we sort of want to remember, and what we're trying to do, is not actually necessarily just go in and clean it up afterwards, because it's dealing with the problem in the first place. So what is causing that litter? Is it overflowing bins? Is it that people are just dropping it? Is it that that the waste is not containerised as it should be because people perhaps haven't even got a bin? There's a number of different factors that could be contributing to it. So rather than just spending more money cleaning it up, we need to understand what the problem is and deal with that first. So that's very much the approach we're trying to take to do that. And sort of linked to that, litter bins, which was also mentioned, we are looking, and in the report I referred to it briefly, we are looking at a litter bin strategy to understand, A, do we have the right bins? B, are they in the right location? C, have we got enough? And part of that, I guess, we'll be looking at the recycling type bins to see if they are the correct ones. We do try to standardise bins where we can, mainly for economies of scale, but also and for the crews in terms of emptying them. But I am aware that there are a number of different types of sort of dual recycling litter bins. So yes, we can have a look at that as part of that. Recycling. Sorry.
I mean, I think it would be fair to say there are some advantages and disadvantages to having single-use bins, and often they're contaminated and they all end up in people aren't perhaps so vigilant in their recycling, so they can actually cause more problems sometimes. So I think as part of that, we'd have to have a look at what's the best fit for the authority, bearing in mind that we do have an aspiration to recycle. Sorry, Ben.
That's okay. In regards to the recycling rate, so we're undertaking a lot of work at the moment to understand where are we. So that's going to include things like a waste compositional analysis, which essentially looks at what people are putting out and then seeing, for example, 50% is food waste or whatever. So we can understand what people are and aren't recycling, and then we can tailor our services accordingly, and also where people are and aren't recycling in what areas. So we then also can tailor our communications appropriately. So we're not telling people that are already doing something to do it, but we are trying to find the people that aren't doing something and understand the reasons why they're not doing it, and encourage them to use those services. We're also looking in tandem with that is participation rates. So again, just understanding not only what people are putting out, but which people are and aren't taking part, again, so we can tailor our services accordingly. In terms of technology, the North London Waste Authority, as our disposal authority, is responsible for the reprocessing facilities for recycling. We have a strong partnership with them to identify new technology as it comes on board. And that's just an ongoing process. In case you're not aware, there are some potential changes coming up. There's some new legislation as part of the Environment Bill, and essentially one of them is about packaging and how we can recycle or recover packaging, and that alone might instigate a sort of technological advances, because they have to devise systems to deal with those materials in particular, perhaps in a more effective way. So we're sort of waiting to see how that, we don't know the outcomes of the consultations yet. In terms of education, so we don't specifically have an education officer as such for waste and recycling and litter. However, we do with Veolia have 2 outreach officers, and they do have a schools programme, which we do try and actively encourage schools to participate in. We're also recently joined up with the Carbon team, who do have a schools outreach officer, to see how we can sort of utilise that resource together, and perhaps at the same time as they're doing education about carbon, that they could do touch, or certainly give out some resources in regards to waste and litter. Again, the North London Waste Authority is at the moment undertaking some work to understand how we can do work in schools more effectively across all of the boroughs, particularly on sort of waste reduction and recycling. I can come back to you with the sort of the programme. I think I've covered the litter bins. So Archway Road on street containment. I suspect, I need to go back and check the programme, but I suspect that the reason that we haven't done that yet is simply due to the width of the pavements and the density of footfall. So we have to follow a criteria in which we assess in conjunction with highways, so we don't cause an obstruction on the pavement, and also that Veolia can stop safely to empty them in terms of their crew not having to cross roads, and also when you lift the box lid up, making sure that wouldn't then go into traffic. So there's a number of